hopefully you guys are figuring out here that this is not really that big of a deal to graph these phase shifts, but wanted to do a secant one because we know that first, and if you were paying attention in class the other day, we want to graph y equals the cosine of x. Okay. Then the second thing we're going to do is graph y equals the cosine with that phase shift in there. We're going to shift the cosine of x pi over 4 radians to the right. And then the third thing is we're going to graph the secant, because we know the secant is 1 over the cosine, and we can just draw that from there. Now I'm not going to go through all those steps like I was doing before. What I am going to do is remind you of the cosine of x having a period of 2 pi. We are going to shift it to pi over 4 to the right. So we have 2 pi, we have pi over 2, and then we have 3 pi over 2, right? So we cut those in half, and then we draw the graph of the cosine of x, and we know the cosine of x looks like this. Comes down, goes up, like that. Okay, so there's y equals cosine of x. Then we're going to shift the cosine graph pi over 4 radians to the right. So shift to the right, pi over 4. We already did this in the first video. So pi over 4 radians, each one of these points is going to move, each one of these key points is going to move pi over 4 radians to the right. So if we go pi over 4 here, we're going to be at pi over 4 1. And then if we move this point here, pi over 4 radians, we're going to halfway between pi over 2 and pi. I like to look at the unit circle. Halfway between pi over 2 and pi, we get 3 pi over 4. Okay, very good point right there. And then halfway between pi and 3 pi over 2, we're going to get 5 pi over 4. And just like we sectioned off on the sine graph, sine of x minus pi over 4, here we have 1 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 5, and then we have 7 pi over 4, and then we have 9 pi over 4. Okay, so this point here gets moved pi over 4 to the right, this point here, pi over 4 there, and then we just keep moving pi over 4 to the right. Okay, now again, until we get to our final graph, we're going to draw the graph dotted. Okay, so this is still not our final graph because right now we're only on step 2. Step 2 is draw the graph of the cosine of x minus pi over 4, and from there we can draw our vertical asymptotes, because what we need to do here is we need to understand that the secant is 1 over the cosine of that same function, or 1 over cosine of x minus pi over 4. Shouldn't have said function, but anyway, so 1 over cosine, wherever the cosine is equal to 0, that means what? You should be able to answer this. If the cosine is equal to 0, that means the secant has something on the graph, and that something is a vertical asymptote. Okay, and so we just go back here and we look at our graph. We can see where the blue graph then is the one we want. Right there where the cosine is 0, we have a vertical asymptote right there. Okay, and here again we've got another vertical asymptote at x equals 7 pi over 4. First one was at x equals 3 pi over 4. Okay, and then the final graph, which color should I use? The final graph, remember the high points on the cosine graph correspond to the low points on the secant graph. So we go right up from there, and then the low points on the cosine graph correspond to the high points on the secant graph. So it looks just like that, because the cosine and the secant are reciprocals. So this green graph right here looks like someone crying. That's the graph of the secant of x minus pi over 4 over one full period. Alright, there you go. That's it. 15 minutes of videos. Should be pretty painless. I'll see you in class.